Welcome to exercise 5, and in this exercise we're going to be looking at articulated motion. So if we have a look at our shot here, we have a fairly standard motion. It's just someone walking from left to right. We also have a bit of camera motion in there as well. Now this is just an example piece of footage. Of course, this was shot on green screen and is pretty easy to key. So in a real life situation, we wouldn't be rotoscoping this at all. We'd be just pulling a key from it. But for the sake of this exercise, I think it's actually pretty good to show a couple of the common things that you will be facing when you try to start to roto humans out. One of those is having to deal with camera motion, and the other one is dealing with how you break up the human body into different parts. Now, I've spoken quite a bit about breaking things up into smaller shapes. What I haven't said really is why. What I haven't demonstrated is why. So I'm going to just do that right now, and let's just try and get one shape that does all of this here. And let's break that up here. Just going to do it really roughly now, just, because I just want to get the point across. Cool, okay, so now if I just try to keyframe this, let's move this back where we're going. Okay, so let's come in and we'll try and get that there. Okay, it's starting to get a bit tricky because this leg's going over here, but then again this leg is now moving behind. So what do we do with this intersecting part here? You can see, it should be painfully obvious that this sort of technique isn't going to work, just having one big shape to try and animate around. It just gets far too complicated to try to figure out where all the different points are going. So this is the reason why you break stuff up. And one of the things that we need to learn to do, or need to get good at, is breaking things up into the smallest number of different shapes that we can. So the basic approach to this shot is going to be taking out the camera movement. Always a good sign, always a good first place to start. If the camera's moving and we can simply get rid of that, then that's one less thing that we have to worry about when we're doing the animating of the masks. So we're going to get rid of the camera movement, and then we're going to break up the legs into separate objects. So looking at where these things are moving, let's take a look at the back leg here. We have the upper thigh moving in one direction. It's moving quite small. We have the lower leg here moving in one way. And we also have the foot moving in a slightly different way as well. And our little connector thing here, our little knee joint, that's also moving in a slightly different way as well. Now we also have the added complication of motion blur, but we'll come to that as we need to. Now I'm only going to be interested in rotoing the legs to begin with. I'll discuss a little bit more either in this exercise or in a later exercise about the difficulties we're going to have with the clothes here as well, because these also present quite an interesting challenge. All right, let's get to this shot. Let's see what we need to do first. So the first thing we need to do is neutralize out that camera move, just to make it easier for us. So we're only having to animate out one level of movement, and that's the movement of the girl's legs, and not the movement of the girl's legs plus the camera. And this is quite a well, it should be quite a straightforward track because we have nice tracking markers. This one, for example, is pretty good, except it does mean that at some point she does cross out past it. So it's a good excuse for showing you how to deal with that, because we didn't look at that in the last exercise. So let's come in, add our new layer, and we are going to call this main movement, because that's really what it's going to contain. And let's come into our tracker now, and let's start tracking these away. So on our point tracker, I'm just going to create another point tracker here and take it over to my area here. I'm also going to come into my preferences again, and remember in the viewer here my picking tolerance was set up quite high because I was dealing with a layer in the last exercise. Well, let's take that down lower again, so I can now come in and grab these a little bit better. Alright, well, let's look over here at the object, because we do have another couple of things that we can do with the motion tracker that we didn't look at in the previous exercise. And that's how we choose the channel that we're going to be working on. So up to now we've been using the luminance channel to form our base. We can also switch this to either the red, green or blue channels. And the blue channel here is giving us by far the best contrast there, and that's obviously what we're looking for. We can also do an RGB, so if we do have very contrasting colours, as we do here in fact, this would be a good place to start as well. But I'm going to go with the blue. Let's take on a bit of pre-processing. I'm just going to denoise it just a small amount and add a little bit of extra contrast and sharpness. Don't need to add too much sharpness at all because it's a pretty prominent shape. One of the other things we can do is if we look at the motion itself, it's actually all moving in pretty much one direction, and that's horizontally. So we can come in and we can change our search offset here so that it's only going to be searching for pixels to the left of the picture, or to the left of our match shape here. I can also change my search size here and just stretch that out just a little bit, just to make doubly sure that we're going to be looking in the right place. Cool, and when I'm happy with that, let's come down and just hit play and track this forwards. Having my hand constantly over the escape key, so when it gets to a certain point I can hit escape and stop that track. Could probably afford to track it through one more time. Cool, now once it comes here, we need to have it tracking another object. And we can do that now just by picking up and moving our match box over here somewhere, or actually to any other point that we can find. I do say any other point, but that actually comes with some quite strict warnings. What you don't want to do is you don't want to move it to a point that's on a completely different plane, or has, for example, shares a very, very different motion than the original point here. We're quite lucky in this instance because I know that my motion tracking markers here are actually going to be moving in pretty much the same way between the points. If I change that to, for example, to put it on her dress there, we could get a good tracking point, but the movement there wouldn't match the movement that we've got going on down here. So with this in mind, let's hit play out on that again, checking out to make sure that that stays all leveled, and you can see that my path remains here, even though my search object is over here and my matching object is over here. Let's just zoom in and just check that that's going through, and you can see that's matching in quite nicely there. I also promised to show you what the smoothing was doing a bit more last time, so I'm going to hit on smooth, and you can see what the smoothing's doing. It's just evening out any jolts and judders. In this case, I'm going to leave the smoothing turned to 0. Okay, so once that's done, I'm going to hit apply, and as I've only got my main movement layer here and selected at the moment, it's going to apply to that. Hit OK on that, come to my transform on my main movement, and just check it out. And that's matching fine. Hit stabilize and check it out now. And that's definitely matching fine. The only thing is we are seeing some small movement going on down here, some small distortion, but that's because the movement of the camera has also changed a bit of perspective. So these are completely locked in, but there's a slight perspective. I think the camera must have been arcing round a little bit as well, so it wasn't just a sort of straight linear movement. It was an arc, or maybe a straight movement with a slight tilt as well. Cool. All right, so let's get to it. Let's for the first part, I'm just going to rename this group here to front leg, because this is more accurately going to describe what it's going to contain. So let's look at what we're going to need to do with this leg here. Well, we've got the same things we had with the back leg. We're going to need to break it up into a upper leg section, upper thigh, and then the lower leg with the calf here as well. We will also need to do one for the foot and one for the knee. So let's find a good frame, or as good a frame as possible for the leg here. It's pretty good. This hasn't got a lot of motion blur. There is a lot of motion blur going on in a great deal of the other parts of the frame. So actually let's start it here. That's probably a good place as well. Always start it at the most complex point that you can. So I'm going to make this fairly generous up here. I'm going to use the X-spline and just bring this down and have quite a big crossover going on up there. I know I can take it quite high up at the top here as well, because eventually we are going to have to make a shape for the skirt as well, just to chop that down. Again, we don't want to do the thing of having it perfect up here and then having to sort of try to, you know, match the billowing skirt we've got going on there, because that's just going to be a hiding to nothing. It's far easier to make another shape here to cut out the rest of the leg. Okay, so let's rename this. It's going to be leg front upper. And let's come over to our X-spline tool again. And the X-spline really is a fantastic tool for doing this particular type of shape, this sort of organic shape, because it's all curves. There's no sort of sharp edges or anything. It's all just lovely curves. And let's bring that round. It's looking pretty good. Turn my overlays off. I can see I need to bring that out just a tad there and there. Cool. So far so good. We are missing a bit of the knee here, and I can see I can probably bring the upper in a little bit there, and the lower in just a tiny bit as well. So that's nice, a good place to start, and let's call this leg front lower. I'm going to leave the foot for now. We'll come back to the foot later. I'm also going to leave the knee for now, because there's a better bit of the knee coming up as well, and we really want to start with the most complex part of the shape before we start playing around with that. So in this case, it's actually best to skip over the knee just for the time being, and then work with it a little bit later. Cool. So long as we know that we're going to fill the knee in, I'm going to be happy. Right. So let's take a little look now, and just start to find the next point of motion, which is going to be on the first frame. And we can see we can probably let's start with the lower leg here. Let's transform this up. So we took a look at some of the things that we could do with the transform bounding box. Right at the very beginning, we can scale it. Let's undo that. Oh, we can reposition it, of course. And we can also, by holding down the Command or Control key, we can rotate it, or we can distort it using the Alt key. But these are going to be rotating or scaling around the center point of the image. In this case, that's not what we want. That's not going to be as useful for us, because the pivot point is really down here somewhere. So luckily we have another set of keyboard shortcuts to learn, and that is Q, W and E. Q moves you into the quick translate mode, so we're just going to be translating. No matter what other things we try to do, we can just translate. And if we hit Q again, it takes us back out into regular transform mode. W lets us rotate, and it sets the anchor point wherever we hit, wherever the cursor was when we hit W. So let's hit W again to take us out, and we'll hit W again down here somewhere. And then wherever we rotate is going to be around that anchor point. Hit W again to move us back into the regular transform mode, and we can then hit Q to move us into transform, or into translate, I mean, and we're pretty much there. And the same goes for scale. If we hit E, that's going to start scaling us, with our anchor point being wherever our cursor was when we hit E. So let's undo that. Hit E again to take us out of scale mode. And come to our upper leg and do the same thing. So we're going to find a point of interest, which is going to be around about. Actually, let's try here, because I know that join there is going to be there. And hit W. Let's zoom us in just a little bit. Hit W there. And I can rotate around about that area there. And you can see that's taken out pretty much most of where I need it to go. I can also see that with my lower leg here, I do need to come in and just scale this up a little bit. Now if we get something that the transform box can't handle, see if I can distort my way out of it. Not quite. I've still got a little bit of overlap going there, so let's undo that. If I find something that the transform box can't handle, that's at that point where I come into the reshape and then work with the individual points. But for the most part, we want to be working on the entire shape rather than with the points. Not only is it quicker, but it also stops us from there we go, stops the mats from chattering. If we were to sort of add, if we were to start to animate, single points willy-nilly, it can create a mat that sort of moves in a weird and wonderful way and doesn't look realistic. Cool, so let's come in and have a little look what's going on there. It's looking pretty good for the most part. There's a little bit of drift there, and I could just come to where we've got the maximum drift, and I can use my cursor keys here just to nudge the shape over as I need to. Cool. All right, so let's move on and let's do another couple of keyframes. What I'm also interested here is we do have quite a big speed change. This is the thing that we saw in the last exercise as well, where it's the speed changes and the sort of non-mechanical changes of speed, these sort of natural flows of speed actually, that are going to come and really trip us up in a lot of things, because people don't often move in a completely standard sort of way. There are small changes in motion as people ramp up to move fairly slowly, then move quicker, and then slow down again in non-linear ways. But let's actually discuss that in just a moment as I bring this back over, and let's just rotate this around. Of course, using the Q, W and E keys there again, just try and help us out. And in this case, let's come over to our lower leg here, and we've got quite a mismatch now going on the front side, and quite a lot of motion blur going on the back there. I want to try and keep the shape as consistent as possible, which is why I'm going to come in, take us out of quick mode, translate, and just sort of use the distort here just to try and help us out just a little bit there. It's not going to help us 100%, so we are going to have to come in maybe and reshape just a couple of the points here. So select multiple points, just drag those up. Now a bit of motion blur is going to do wonders on this and really help to sell this. So I'm not going to fuss too much on that one. Let's take a look at the knee, see if there's a good place for the knee. We're getting there, I suppose, for the knee. But let's have a look. Once we've got these two, which are matching up quite nicely, we need to figure out what to do with the bits in between. Now there is a little thing in the timeline here which does let us change our keyframe interpolation. Let's go to the lower one first here, and if I right click on any of the keyframes, we have interpolation here, and this is how it moves from one keyframe to the next. So we have hold, and the icon changes here to a little block, so this means that it doesn't do anything until it moves to the next keyframe, and then it just snaps to the new position. So that's hold. That's often quite useful. We have linear, which is currently set up as a standard one, which moves in a linear way from keyframe 1 to keyframe 2. We have ease in and out, ease in and ease out. Well, let's ease out here and see what happens. This means that the animation is slower at the beginning and then ramps up a bit faster. This seems like if we can, and ease in as well, and this seems to actually help us out quite a bit on this particular case. Now I'm usually a bit wary of using any other keyframe interpolations other than linear, because it it can really sort of mess you up quite a bit along the way. But in this case, it seems to have worked out quite fine. But I'm just generally wary of using any other keyframe interpolation than linear. Let's take this other one here, see if that works out as well. Not quite as well, and if it doesn't hit the nail on the head, just undo it. You could find yourself in quite a significant bit of trouble if you are using non-linear keyframes in a sort of standard way, because that movement doesn't have that sort of predictable control that you're looking for. So whereas on occasions it might work out nicely for you, a lot of time it's going to be quicker just to bash in a couple of new keyframes than it is to battle around non-linear keyframes and a whole host of other frames. So I've added another keyframe. It's still slipping, so it's slipping 2 frames afterwards, so I'll come in there, just transform that out. We do end up adding another couple of keyframes in that we might not have had to have done, but we are guaranteed that the results are going to be what we're after. Same with this one here. Just going to add another keyframe, just whip that around just a tiny amount. If we hold down the control or command key when we are rotating around, that gives us a much more controlled rotation than if we were just sort of clicking and dragging. So it gives us that fine granular detail that we need. I need to come to the reshape tool just to reshape these last little bits here. Actually, let's reshape this one as well. And what I am going to check is, let's come to my lower one here and just check that keyframe interpolation is back to linear again for the rest of them. Actually, let's switch that back into easing, because that seemed to be okay on that particular one, but not on the upper leg. So let's make sure that from now on these ones here both set to linear. There you are. That's good. Cool. Now another thing that I'm doing differently here than I would normally do, just because I'm showing you what's going on. A lot of the time, instead of keyframing whole objects all at once. I'll actually just concentrate on one particular aspect, and then once I've got that worked out, then I'll move on to the next one. Let's bring this one up here. And I'm not sure exactly if that's moving consistently. Seems to be. So we are going to have to reshape, obviously, because the whole shape has changed quite drastically. So let's come in and we'll just scale this as we need to. And maybe just use a quick distort there as well. Cool, and down here by the knee, so long as I've got this bit, let's zoom in a little bit here, as long as I've got this bit covered, I know that the rest of the knee is going to be covered either by the separate knee shape or by the lower limb there. Cool, so that's working out nicely. Let's bring that there, bring us into quick mode translate with the Q key. And let's just distort this. Hit the Q key again to come us back, take us back out, and just distort this up. And that's slipping quite a lot, so let's find where the frame of most slippage is, probably there. Zoom in just a slight tad. I'm going to need to reshape this just a little bit. So let's come in. I hit R for the reshape node there, for the reshape tool. So you can see I don't like using this too much. That's looking cool there. Probably bring that in just a tiny bit. And I might want to add another one. So I'm just going to quickly animate this up. Cool, so I'm happy with that now. That seems to be pretty good. Well, good enough for what we're trying to do with it anyway today. Okay, so let's take a look at this knee that we haven't done yet. And let's find a good place for the knee. And that's going to be here. So I've done my leg, I'm going to lock my leg. I'm going to leave it turned on though. I'm going to change the colour here. Maybe something a little bit more muted so it doesn't stand out a whole load. Cool, and we'll create a new shape for the knee. And now it's going to come out and do that. So we know I'm going to need a few points going on here, though it is a very simple shape for the most part. We need to give ourselves a little bit of flexibility. Let's turn that to, let's just stretch this out. So I'm holding down Alt here, just to bring this in slightly. Cool. And I'll call this front leg knee. And let's just work solely on the knee now. So the knee's quite an interesting one because that's probably the thing that's going to change the most. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep looking at this point here and know that it's going to match up with this point here. So hit T to come into transform. And there's going to be quite a lot of this stuff that I'm not going to be able to do in the transform, because the actual shape of the knee has changed so much. I'm going to have to use the reshape a whole load. But that's also fine, because I mean that's why we created this particular shape here, so that we could come in. Would bring that down there. Yeah, so we could actually come in and make those concessions for the knee. Boom, boom. Even there, it's probably a bit too far out for me. But you see, once I've made that big change, these smaller reshapes should be a lot more sort of subtle. And we can start using the other tools a bit more. So let's bring us to there. That's probably the one where it's the worst out. Now, already I'm getting a bit lost of where my point is here. So here's a really nice little feature we've got. I'm going to select my main knee point here, my control point. And I'm going to tag it. So right click on that and tag it, and we get a little tag popping in along here. If we weren't using a stabilized layer here, we would actually see this tag pop right along next to the control point, but the stabilization from the tracker is sending it a little bit further off. But that's fine. I mean, it's okay so long as we know where we are, then it's all good. Now this knee is changing so much, I'm actually not surprised that we do have to pretty much keyframe it on each and every single frame up until the point where it starts to settle down again, which is probably around about there, which luckily is our last frame. So we can come in, transform this up, come out of quick transform mode, come back into reshape mode, and we'll find that there's our little tag there, which should be sitting right on the knee, and it is. So let's come in. Cool, and I can see we've still got a couple of little bits and bobs that we need to tidy up a little bit, especially with the upper leg here. Let's just bring that over. So let's unlock that, bring us into transform to swing us over. There we go. Now I keep saying we are going to come back to motion blur and then show you motion blur. Again, this is another one. We're going to probably have covered most of the motion blur that I want to show you by the time we actually get to that exercise. But I do want to turn motion blur on here and turn it on in my node as well. Just because this is quite a... turn the overlays off. Just because is quite a huge amount of motion blur that's going on in this shot. So it's important to see the difference of motion blur on and off. Probably also a good idea to just take you through the different views again. We looked at this way back in exercise 1, but we've been working mainly with the output here, which is showing us the output of the node. We can come to our foreground here, which is just showing us our foreground without any of the overlays here, which is one of the reasons why I haven't been working in foreground for these tutorials, is because it's nice to be able to get that sort of little overlay going on here. We can also see the background, which we haven't put in yet. We can check out a composite. So a composite is going to slam our foreground and our background together. Let's turn our overlays and our alpha channel off. And because we haven't got a background with which to do a slap comp, well, let's actually bring one in. So let's come in and find something from one of the previous exercises. Let's look at the signage one again. And under my inputs here, I can now change my background input to signage 1 and update my composite mode here, and we'll see what a lovely effect my rotoscoping has when we see it in context. Now it's an absolutely ridiculous slap comp, and it's looking annoying enough that I'm just going to turn that off. Just come back in here because it is basically obscuring what I want to show you. But it is one way of doing a slap comp, just to see how things are going to work in situ. What I do want to see is just the difference that we can make with the motion blur. So the motion blur here has, let's turn that off, has taken out quite a lot of this stuff here and is giving us this green fringing. Now in this case we will be able to take this out when we get to the compositing app because it is just a green screen. But if this was over another background, we probably wouldn't want this background bleed to happen. So it's at this point where we can come into our front leg upper again, and we can use the shrink grow just to eat away a tiny bit of that matte. And we'll have to do that with the knee as well. So it doesn't take a lot to make a big difference. And we can see what that is actually looking a whole lot better. If I turn off the motion blur there, you can see it's quite difficult to see what the problem was before. But with motion blur enabled, we can much more clearly see the potential problems we have, especially with our knee here. Let's just transform that back in, because there's something, I think it's just slipped a little bit there. Cool. But I hope that gives you another idea of how we can start to deal with these particular types of problems. I'll just hit F here and we'll take this back and we'll look at our output again. Let's turn this on. This is going to look quite funny because at some point the leg is going to disappear. So we've looked at the different stages about how we start to analyse up these sort of things. The first thing we did was remove the camera shake, and this really did make things a whole load easier when we were trying to roto out these legs here. So the next thing we did was try and figure out how many simple shapes we could break these legs into, and eventually let's actually count up. If we were doing the whole shot, we would need upper leg, lower leg, foot here, upper leg, lower leg, foot here, so that's 6. We'd need one more for the hand because the hand is moving fairly consistently. Actually, I'd probably do 2 for the hand, 1 for the main hand here and 1 for this finger here, because that finger is moving away. So that's 7. We need 1 more for this hand, which is moving again in a very sort of straightforward kind of way. And then we'd need quite a few to break up this this dress. We're going to look again and properly analyse this shot in the final exercise, but it's a good one to look at. So once we've broken those shapes up and used our tracker to stabilise things out, we actually started to build up these certain shapes. Now here's something else that I want to just go over really quickly before we end up. And if we were going to do the back leg now, let's add another layer here and we'll call this back leg. We'll call this back leg. We want to have the same movement going on to help stabilise things up, so we can just reuse this tracker. So we come back into our tracker here with this one selected, have back leg selected here, so it's the active layer, hit apply on that, and we've now got the same matrix being applied. Let's just check that out. Turn my overlays back on. We've now got that same matrix being applied to our back leg as well, so we can reuse the trackers that we've got for multiple layer groups here. Right, and in the next exercise, we're going to be looking at a different type of tracker. We're going to be looking at the planar tracker and looking at some circumstances where it's going to be really useful and some circumstances where it's not going to be that useful at all. All right, so let's just join me in exercise 6. Thanks for now.